On behalf of our family, we want to thank all of you for the prayers for our beloved.
2:28 a.m., the exact moment according to medical device data when Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker went silent. Not because it malfunctioned, not because the battery died. These devices are engineered to function for years without failure. They continue operating whether the patient is sleeping, resting, or active. They transmit data automatically, reliably, constantly, until something interrupts that communication. And at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, something did. An 84-year-old woman's pacemaker, which had been communicating normally with her smartphone for months, suddenly stopped. 41 minutes had passed since the first camera at her residence went offline. 41 minutes during which someone operated around or inside the Catalina Foothills home where Nancy lived alone. And at the end of those 41 minutes, her pacemaker ceased transmission. That silence tells a story about what happened to Nancy Guthrie during a window of time that digital devices documented with precision that human witnesses cannot match. This is not about how pacemakers work. This is about what it means when one stops, what it reveals about duration, about planning, about the moments an 84-year-old woman spent between when intrusion began and when her medical device went dark. Before we examine what a pacemaker going silent at 2:28 a.m. reveals about the moments Nancy Guthrie disappeared, and why 41 minutes represents an operational timeline that suggests planning rather than panic. If you follow cases where digital timestamps and medical device data reconstruct events more accurately than memory or testimony, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Unsolved Archive, we investigate cold cases and unsolved mysteries using the evidence that cannot lie, cannot forget, and cannot be manipulated, because digital devices record moments with brutal honesty. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, 3 timestamps tell a story that raised immediate questions for investigators. 1:47 a.m., 2:12 a.m., 2:28 a.m. Those numbers became central to understanding not just what happened, but how long it took, and what that duration reveals about intent, about knowledge, about someone who had time and used every minute of it. Nancy Guthrie is the 84-year-old mother of NBC Today show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie. She lived alone in Tucson, Arizona. She required daily medications for serious medical conditions. She had a pacemaker monitoring her heart, and on the evening of January 31st, she returned home from dinner at her daughter Annie's house around 9:48 p.m. Her garage door opened. She went inside. The door closed at 9:50. Everything appeared normal. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was dark. For the next several hours, nothing seemed wrong to anyone observing from outside. But in the early morning darkness of February 1st, a sequence began that would be documented by machines, not witnesses. Cameras, medical devices, smartphones, each recording a timestamp that investigators would later assemble into a timeline that answered some questions and raised others far more disturbing. 1:47 a.m. A camera at Nancy's residence went offline. Not the front doorbell camera that would later become famous for capturing footage of a masked individual. A different camera, believed to be positioned near the back of the property. The back door, investigators would later discover, was found wide open. 1:47 a.m. marked the beginning, the first moment when something measurably wrong occurred at Nancy Guthrie's home. The first digital footprint of an intrusion. The first timestamp in a sequence that would span 41 minutes and end with a pacemaker going silent. 2:12 a.m., 25 minutes later, the front doorbell camera captured footage. A masked individual appeared at Nancy's front entrance. Black ski mask covering the face, gloves on both hands, a black Ozark Trail backpack on the back. The person reached toward the camera, touched it with gloved hands, pulled at foliage from Nancy's yard, apparently trying to obscure or disable the view. The footage showed this activity, the attempts to blind the camera, the deliberate actions of someone who knew they were being recorded and wanted it stopped. Then the camera went dark. Glass fragments would later be found beneath the camera location, according to reporting from Fox News journalist Michael Ruiz, suggesting it was ultimately smashed or forcibly removed. Not just covered, not just disabled, destroyed. 2:28 a.m. 16 minutes after the front door footage, 41 minutes after the first camera went offline, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped communicating with her phone. That silence became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire investigation, because pacemakers do not simply stop. They are built to last. They are designed for reliability. They function for years. And when one goes silent, it means something fundamental has changed. 41 minutes. Let that duration settle. 41 minutes from first camera offline to pacemaker silence. Former Detective Ted Williams, who investigated homicides in Washington, D.C. for decades, analyzed this timeline publicly. His assessment was direct and unambiguous. Spending 41 minutes around or inside a residence is not normal for a burglary. It is not even normal for most violent crimes. Burglars operate on speed. Get in, grab valuables, get out. Speed is survival. Every minute inside increases risk exponentially. Risk of neighbors hearing something, risk of dogs barking, risk of patrol cars passing, risk of the homeowner waking, risk of witnesses, risk of mistakes. 41 minutes is not speed. 41 minutes is something different entirely. It suggests comfort. Someone who felt safe spending nearly 3/4 of an hour operating around this property. It suggests knowledge. Someone who understood when Nancy was alone and vulnerable. It suggests planning. Someone who had prepared for what they intended to do and allocated time to execute it properly. And it suggests purpose beyond simple theft. Because 41 minutes allows time for things that burglary does not require. Time to search thoroughly. Time to stage scenes. Time to create false narratives. Time to do exactly what was planned without rushing, without panicking, without making the mistakes that haste creates. What was happening during those 41 minutes? That question haunts the investigation. That question keeps Savannah Guthrie and her siblings awake at night wondering what their mother endured. 25 minutes passed between the back camera going offline and the front door footage being captured. What occurred during that first gap? Was Nancy confronted immediately when someone entered through the back door that was later found wide open? Or was she still sleeping, unaware, while an intruder moved through her home in darkness? The cameras cannot answer these questions. They only document the endpoints. 1:47 when intrusion began, 2:12 when someone appeared at the front, but the 25 minutes between exist in a gap that physical evidence and witness testimony must fill. The front door footage showed activity at 2:12 a.m., a masked individual attempting to disable the camera. But why would someone who entered at the back at 1:47 appear at the front entrance 25 minutes later? This sequence raises uncomfortable possibilities. Was this a departure? Someone leaving through the front after entering through the back? If so, what were they doing inside for 25 minutes before leaving? Or was this a return? Someone who left through the back door after initial entry and then came back to the front for a specific purpose? Perhaps to disable the front camera before final departure occurred through another exit? The footage documents the moment, but not the context. It shows the action, but not the reason. And then 16 minutes of silence. 16 minutes between the front door footage at 2:12 and the pacemaker stopping at 2:28. What happened during that final window? If the perpetrator was still present, what were they doing? If Nancy was being removed from her residence, this would be when it occurred. If something terrible happened, this timeline places it in these final 16 minutes. The pacemaker stopping means something changed fundamentally about Nancy's condition or location. It means the device could no longer communicate with her phone. And that silence, that sudden absence of signal, became a timestamp marking the moment when whatever was going to happen had happened. Pacemakers do not simply fail. Sheriff Chris Nanos emphasized medical urgency repeatedly in public statements. Nancy needed her medications. Nancy needed her pacemaker. These were not optional medical devices. These were life-sustaining technologies. And the pacemaker specifically was designed to function regardless of what the patient was doing. Sleeping, walking, resting, active. The device continues operating. It continues transmitting, unless something interrupts that transmission. And at 2:28 a.m., something did. There are limited explanations for why a pacemaker would stop communicating. The device could be moved beyond Bluetooth range from the smartphone. That range is typically 10 to 30 feet depending on obstacles and interference. If Nancy was taken from her residence and transported in a vehicle, the distance would exceed connectivity range almost immediately. The pacemaker would continue functioning inside Nancy's chest, regulating her heartbeat, operating as designed, but it would stop communicating with the phone left behind in the residence. This scenario fits abduction. It fits removal. It fits someone taking Nancy away from her home. Alternatively, the pacemaker could be damaged through external force. Trauma to the chest area could affect the device. Blunt force could disrupt its operation. This scenario fits violence. It fits injury. It fits something happening to Nancy that was forceful enough to damage medical equipment implanted in her body. Or something could happen to Nancy herself that affects cardiac function in ways that alter the pacemaker's transmission. Medical events, cardiac episodes, scenarios where the device continues operating, but the body it monitors changes in ways that affect signal. None of these explanations are comforting. All of them indicate something serious occurred at 2:28 a.m. The medications Nancy required daily were found in her residence. Sheriff Nanos did not just mention this once. He emphasized it repeatedly, in multiple interviews, in press conferences, in statements to media. Nancy needed her medications. She needed them daily. They were not optional supplements, they were prescription medications managing serious health conditions. And those medications were visible in her home. They were accessible. Investigators found them during crime scene processing. They were not hidden in locked cabinets. They were not stored in secure locations. They were where Nancy accessed them every day, where anyone entering her residence would see them. Yet they were not taken when Nancy disappeared. Someone spent 41 minutes operating around this property. They had time. They had opportunity. They moved through the residence, whether searching or staging or executing their plan. 41 minutes provides ample time to notice prescription bottles, ample time to make decisions about what to take, ample time to gather anything deemed necessary, but the medications were left behind. That decision creates a contradiction that investigators could not ignore. If ransom was the motive, keeping the victim healthy becomes paramount. This is not theory. This is fundamental logic that applies to every ransom case. Dead victims cannot be exchanged for money. Victims who deteriorate medically create complications. They reduce negotiation time. They increase risk that the victim will be unable to survive long enough for ransom payment to occur. Any rational kidnapper planning to collect ransom understands this reality. Take the victim's medications. Ensure they can survive the duration of captivity. Protect the asset you intend to trade for cash. The fact that medications were left behind suggests either profound ignorance or deliberate indifference. Ignorance seems unlikely given the time spent in the residence. 41 minutes allows thorough observation. Anyone spending that much time inside a home would notice prescription bottles. The alternative is indifference, not caring whether Nancy survived long term, not planning to keep her alive for ransom exchange. And that indifference contradicts the entire ransom narrative. Ransom demands were made, communications occurred. A note was found, though its content remained largely confidential. But the medications left behind tell a different story. They suggest that whatever was actually planned, it was not about keeping Nancy alive long enough to collect payment. The ransom elements may have been staged. Misdirection, creating a false narrative about kidnapping for money while the real motive remained hidden. And if the ransom was fake, if it was staging rather than genuine demand, then what was the real reason Nancy was taken? The decision by Sheriff Chris Nanos to deploy the homicide squad on day one takes on stark significance when understood against the timeline evidence and the medications left behind. Missing persons cases typically begin with search and rescue operations, teams looking for someone who might be lost, injured, or voluntarily absent. Homicide investigators are specialists brought in when evidence suggests serious violence has occurred, when the case appears to involve intentional harm rather than accident or voluntary departure. Sheriff Nanos made the choice to involve homicide immediately when Nancy was reported missing on February 1st. This was not standard procedure for a missing person. But something about what he saw convinced him this required criminal investigation from the very beginning. What did he see that made this decision so clear? The timeline showing 41 minutes of operational activity, the pacemaker stopping at a specific timestamp, the medications left behind despite their necessity, the back door found wide open, and blood. Multiple sources, including veteran crime reporter Ashley Banfield citing informed sources, reported that blood was found inside Nancy's residence, not just on the front porch where later testing confirmed biological material belonged to Nancy, but inside the home itself, inside the rooms where Nancy lived, inside the spaces where she should have been safe. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bowden analyzed photographs of blood evidence. His professional assessment identified specific patterns that told a medical story. Larger droplets indicated gravitational dripping from a bleeding source. These were free-falling drops, he explained. Blood falling from a height and impacting surfaces. The physics of these drops, their size and shape, indicated they fell freely through air before striking the floor or furniture. Smaller droplets with pale centers suggested something different. Expiration or coughing, according to his analysis. Blood mixed with air from respiratory passages. When blood comes from the nose or mouth and the person is breathing or coughing, it creates distinctive spatter with pale centers, where air bubbles mixed with the blood. Nancy was bleeding from her nose or mouth, according to Dr. Bowden's conclusion. She was upright and moving while bleeding, according to what the pattern distribution suggested. The blood was not pooled in one location, as it would be if she fell and remained stationary. It was distributed across an area, indicating movement, and she was breathing or coughing forcefully enough to create the smaller expelled droplets mixed with the larger gravitational drops. This blood evidence was found inside the residence, inside where Nancy should have been safe, inside where someone gained entry and something violent occurred. This evidence on day one told Sheriff Nanos what he needed to know. This was not a missing person who wandered away. This was not someone who left voluntarily. This was a crime scene. This was violence. This was blood and forced entry and medications left behind, and a pacemaker going silent at 2:28 a.m. After 41 minutes of documented activity, he deployed the homicide squad because the evidence demanded it, because experienced law enforcement recognizes the difference between someone missing and someone taken, between disappearance and abduction, between uncertainty and crime. The investigation that followed became one of the largest missing person efforts in recent Arizona history. 400 officers, according to Sheriff Nanos's public statements. Local, state, and federal personnel working together, not just searching, investigating, building a criminal case while simultaneously hoping Nancy might be found alive. 18,000 tips came to the Sheriff's Department. Approximately 14 to 15,000 tips came to the FBI. Combined, over 30,000 pieces of information from a public that cared about an 84-year-old woman and wanted to help. After surveillance footage was released showing the masked individual at Nancy's door, almost 5,000 more tips arrived within hours. The response demonstrated community engagement, people watching, people caring, people believing that maybe someone saw something that could help. The surveillance footage itself became a focal point. The masked individual, according to FBI analysis using sophisticated photogrammetry techniques, was a male approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 with an average build. Not exceptionally tall, not notably short, average. The kind of description that fits many people, but provides a starting point. The backpack visible in the footage was identified through detailed analysis as a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking pack sold at Walmart stores. This specific identification mattered because it created investigative opportunities. Former NYPD Inspector Paul Morrow, analyzing the case publicly, emphasized the significance of the backpack. Walmart maintains detailed sales records, he explained. Every purchase creates a data point. Date, time, location, method of payment. If someone bought this backpack with a credit card, that purchase links directly to an identity. If someone bought it with cash, many Walmart stores have security cameras positioned above checkout lanes. Those cameras record transactions. Cross-referencing purchases of this specific backpack model with video footage of those transactions could identify who bought it. And if investigators could link purchases of the backpack, the style of mask visible in footage, gloves matching what was worn, and any other items visible in the surveillance video to single individuals that would create a focused suspect pool worthy of intensive investigation. This is not speculation. According to Morrow's professional assessment, this is standard investigative methodology. The backpack is relatively rare, he noted. Not something everyone owns. Not something purchased casually without purpose. Someone bought that specific model for a reason. And if they bought it recently, if they bought it along with other items visible in the footage, if they paid in a way that created records or appeared on camera, then that purchase becomes a trail leading directly to their identity. The request for additional surveillance video from the community eventually expanded to cover an unusually broad time frame. Initially, investigators asked for footage from January 31st and February 1st, the immediate window around Nancy's disappearance. But subsequently, the request grew. They asked for footage from January 1st through February 2nd, the entire month. Not just the night of the disappearance, not just a few days before, the full month. And within that broad request, they asked specifically for particular attention to January 11th, between 9 p.m. and midnight. Why January 11th? That date was 20 days before Nancy disappeared. 3 weeks earlier, the precision of requesting footage from that specific evening suggested investigators believed something significant occurred then, something worth documenting, something that might show a vehicle, a person, activity that connected to what happened 3 weeks later. The most logical explanation, the theory that fits the evidence, is reconnaissance. Someone watching Nancy's home, observing her property, learning her routines, identifying when she was alone, noting security camera locations, understanding the layout, preparing. 20 days provides time for planning, time to develop a detailed approach, time to identify vulnerabilities and create strategies to exploit them, time to purchase equipment needed for what was intended, time to rehearse, to prepare, to ensure that when execution occurred, it would proceed smoothly. And if someone was surveilling Nancy's residence on January 11th, if cameras in the neighborhood captured that surveillance, then that footage could identify who was preparing for what would happen on February 1st. The theory that the residence was surveilled before the crime gained support from multiple factors, beyond just the specific date request. The 41-minute duration itself suggests comfort born of knowledge. Someone who understood the environment well enough to operate for nearly 3/4 of an hour without apparent concern about detection. The knowledge of camera locations, evidenced by the back camera going offline first and the front camera being targeted for destruction, indicates prior awareness of where those cameras were positioned. The timing, occurring when Nancy was alone and vulnerable in the deep hours of morning, suggests understanding of when she was isolated. The apparent familiarity with access points indicated by entry through the back door, later found open and activity at the front entrance, points towards someone who had studied the property. All of these factors combine to paint a picture not of opportunistic crime but of planned operation. Someone who had prepared, someone who had watched, someone who knew. And if that preparation included surveillance on January 11th or other dates, then video footage from the neighborhood during those time frames could provide the breakthrough investigators needed. Contractors who had worked on Nancy's property became natural subjects of investigative interest, not because contractors are inherently suspicious, but because they have access. They spend time at properties. They see interior layouts during work. They observe routines while present over multiple days. They note security measures as part of understanding the environment where they work. They develop familiarity with residents through regular interaction. And all of this creates the knowledge base that would enable someone to plan what occurred at Nancy's residence. A neighbor, Laura Gargano, noted publicly that Nancy's roof appeared unusually clean compared to other homes in the area that had accumulated dirt from recent rain. The observation was specific enough to suggest recent work. She suggested to investigators that they examine contractors who had performed roof work or other services before the disappearance. This tip represented the kind of community observation that investigations rely on. Someone noticing a detail that seemed minor but might connect to larger patterns. Day workers, repair services, landscapers, pool maintenance, any of the routine service providers who work on residential properties in areas like the Catalina foothills. These individuals gain access that most people never have. They enter properties. They see how people live. They understand security systems. They observe when homeowners are present or absent. They develop knowledge that, in the wrong hands or combined with wrong intent, becomes dangerous. Not every contractor or service provider is a threat. The overwhelming majority are honest professionals. But investigations must consider who had the access and knowledge that would enable what happened to Nancy. The DNA evidence found at Nancy's residence included biological material that did not belong to Nancy or anyone in her immediate circle, according to what Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly. This unknown DNA carried potential to identify whoever was present during those 41 minutes. But DNA evidence requires careful interpretation, because not all DNA transfers the same way or carries the same investigative weight. Touch DNA, the category that creates the most interpretive challenges, transfers through simple contact. When someone touches a surface, they leave behind skin cells. Those cells contain DNA, but touch DNA can transfer innocently. A delivery driver who handed Nancy a package could leave DNA on that package. If Nancy brought the package inside and set it on a table, the driver's DNA is now inside her home, despite the driver never entering. A contractor who touched tools or materials that were later brought into the residence could leave DNA that transfers to interior surfaces. This is why the kind of DNA and its location matter enormously. DNA from blood indicates injury or violence. DNA from other biological fluids indicates specific types of contact that rarely have innocent explanations. DNA found in locations where no legitimate reason exists for someone to have been present carries more weight than DNA in common areas. The testing being conducted at DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida, would determine what kind of biological material was collected, where exactly it was found, and whether it matched known samples or required additional investigative work to identify. This laboratory's selection was not arbitrary. DNA Labs International had solved the Colonial Parkway murders. These were decades-old cases, multiple victims, a serial pattern that had remained unsolved for years. Advanced DNA analysis conducted at this facility attributed at least 6 murders to a deceased individual, finally providing answers in cases that had haunted investigators and families for decades. The decision to send Nancy's evidence to this same laboratory reflected confidence in proven capability, combined with need for sophisticated analysis. The cost of this testing, according to conflicting reports, was either $200,000 or performed pro bono. Reuters reported the $200,000 figure, citing federal law enforcement sources. News 4 Tucson reported Sheriff Nanos stating some work was pro bono. Both might be partially accurate. Perhaps initial testing was provided without charge, while extensive additional analysis required payment. DNA testing is expensive. Comprehensive analysis of multiple evidence items with expedited processing easily reaches 6-figure costs. $200,000 for the scope of testing required in a case of this magnitude and urgency would not be unusual. The FBI's involvement began Monday, February 2nd, according to Sheriff Nanos's timeline. They were contacted at 8 a.m. the morning after Nancy was reported missing. They immediately agreed to assist. The characterization of their response contradicts reports of acrimony or conflict between agencies. The FBI was cooperative from first contact, according to Sheriff Nanos's emphatic statements. They worked alongside local law enforcement. They provided resources. They took custody of digital evidence, including cameras, phones, and computers, because federal laboratories have specialized capabilities for analyzing such materials. Meanwhile, biological evidence remained with the private laboratory that already had comparison samples and family DNA markers, creating efficiency by consolidating that category of testing in one location. Sheriff Nanos addressed the conflict narrative directly and repeatedly. There is no daylight between local and federal law enforcement, he stated, using specific language emphasizing unity. The agencies were working together. They were coordinating. They were sharing information and resources. Any reports suggesting otherwise were inaccurate or reflected misunderstandings about normal investigative processes where different agencies handle different aspects of evidence processing. The family's response to Nancy's disappearance reflected heartbreaking anguish visible to anyone watching. Savannah Guthrie released emotional video appeals. Her face showed the strain. Her voice carried the weight of not knowing what happened to her mother. The family believed Nancy was alive, according to their statements. They maintained hope despite concerning evidence. They expressed willingness to pay ransom if legitimate contact occurred. But whether any genuine ransom communication happened remained unclear and was never confirmed through official channels. Various communications claiming to have information about Nancy emerged. Some were sent to media outlets, particularly TMZ, which received multiple messages from individuals claiming knowledge of Nancy's location or condition. But analysis of these communications suggested opportunistic scammers rather than genuine offers from whoever actually took Nancy. The language was theatrical. The demands escalated. The purported insider knowledge could have been constructed by anyone following media coverage. And critically, no proof of life was ever provided in these communications. No photograph of Nancy taken after her disappearance. No recording of her voice. No information that could only come from someone who actually had access to her. These communications appeared to be parasites attempting to exploit family desperation rather than legitimate contact from kidnappers. The medical urgency increased relentlessly with each passing day. Nancy's medications were necessary for managing serious conditions. Time without treatment created risks that compounded. Conditions that are manageable with medication can deteriorate rapidly without it. The pacemaker stopping at 2:28 a.m. marked a critical point in the timeline. But what that cessation actually meant about Nancy's condition required answers that medical device data alone could not provide. The pacemaker could have stopped communicating because Nancy was moved beyond Bluetooth range from her phone. If she was placed in a vehicle and driven away from her residence, the distance would exceed the 10 to 30-foot connectivity range almost immediately. The pacemaker would continue functioning inside Nancy's chest, regulating her heartbeat as designed, but it would stop transmitting data to the phone left behind. This scenario fits abduction theory. It fits removal from the residence. It suggests Nancy might still be alive at 2:28 a.m., just beyond the reach of wireless technology. Alternatively, the pacemaker could have been damaged through trauma. External force to the chest area can affect implanted devices. Blunt force impact can disrupt operation. This scenario fits violence theory. It fits injury occurring at or near the 2:28 timestamp. It suggests something happening to Nancy forceful enough to damage medical equipment designed to withstand normal life stresses. Or something could have occurred affecting Nancy herself that altered cardiac function in ways that changed pacemaker transmission. Medical events, cardiac episodes, scenarios where the heart the device monitors experiences events that affect signal. These possibilities exist in the realm of medical emergency rather than mechanical failure. None of these explanations provide comfort. All of them indicate something serious occurred at 2:28 a.m. All of them suggest that moment marked a fundamental change in Nancy's situation. The silence that began, then continues. The pacemaker has not resumed communication. That ongoing silence tells its own story about Nancy's location or condition in the days and weeks since. The timeline became the skeleton onto which investigators attached every other piece of evidence. Witness statements could be verified against timestamps. Someone claiming to have seen activity at a certain time could be checked against what digital devices recorded at that same moment. Physical evidence could be evaluated in sequence. Blood patterns could be correlated with the timeline of when injury likely occurred. Theories about what happened could be tested against duration and timing. Scenarios that required more time than 41 minutes allowed could be eliminated. Sequences that contradicted the order of documented timestamps could be rejected. The 41 minutes told investigators they were looking for someone methodical, someone who planned rather than panicked, someone who had time and used every minute. Burglars rush. Opportunistic criminals act on impulse and flee quickly. But 41 minutes from first camera offline to pacemaker silence indicates measured action. It indicates someone executing a plan with confidence that detection was unlikely. It indicates knowledge of when Nancy was vulnerable and how long that vulnerability window remained open. The question that haunted everyone following the case was what those 41 minutes actually contained. What happened during the 25 minutes between the back camera going offline at 1:47 and the front door footage at 2:12? Was Nancy awake during that time? Was she aware someone had entered her home? Was she able to react, to resist, to call for help? Or had something already occurred that left her unable to act? The blood evidence showing she was bleeding and moving indicates consciousness during at least part of the timeline. But the exact sequence of events within those 25 minutes remained shrouded. And what occurred during the 16 minutes between the front door footage at 2:12 and the pacemaker stopping at 2:28, this final window might hold the answer to Nancy's fate. If she was still in the residence at 2:12, these were the minutes when she was taken. If the perpetrator was still present, these were the minutes when whatever was planned reached its conclusion. If violence occurred, this timeline places it in this compressed window. 16 minutes from documented footage of someone at the front door to the moment Nancy's pacemaker went silent. 16 minutes that could explain everything if only the evidence could speak with more detail. The blood evidence showed Nancy was bleeding before those final moments. The patterns analyzed by Dr. Bowden indicated nose or mouth bleeding mixed with respiratory activity. This type of injury, according to medical knowledge, often results from facial trauma. Being struck in the face can cause nasal bleeding. Impact to the mouth area can cause bleeding from damaged tissues. The fact that Nancy was upright and moving while bleeding, according to what the blood distribution pattern demonstrated, meant she was conscious and ambulatory during at least part of the 41-minute window. She was not immediately incapacitated. She was not rendered unconscious at first contact. She was moving through her residence while injured and bleeding. But at 2:28 a.m., something changed fundamentally. The pacemaker went silent. Communication ceased. And from that moment forward, Nancy Guthrie was no longer at her residence in any condition or location that allowed her medical device to transmit to her phone. Whether she was alive or had been seriously harmed at that precise timestamp remained unknown from pacemaker data alone. Whether she was being transported away from her home or whether something final had already occurred could not be determined from the digital evidence. The silence that began at 2:28 a.m. marked the boundary between what technology could document and what investigation would have to reconstruct through other means. For Savannah Guthrie and her siblings, the timeline represented both precision and anguish. Precision because it documented exactly when things happened with accuracy that human memory could never match. 1:47 when intrusion began. 2:12 when the front door showed activity. 2:28 when their mother's pacemaker went silent. These were not approximations. These were exact moments, digital truth. But that precision brought anguish because it revealed how much time passed while something terrible unfolded. 41 minutes. Not a few frantic moments. Not a sudden crime. 41 minutes during which their mother's medical device was still communicating, still transmitting, still indicating she was somewhere within range of her phone, until she was not. The search for Nancy continued with intensity that reflected both investigative commitment and family desperation. Search teams combed terrain. K-9 units worked areas identified as potentially significant. Specialized equipment searched locations where evidence or remains might be concealed. But, as days turned to weeks, the likelihood of finding Nancy alive diminished, while the probability that investigators were dealing with the worst outcome increased. The timeline analysis was not about abandoning hope. Sheriff Nanos emphasized repeatedly that they continued searching as though Nancy could be found alive, but the timeline was about understanding exactly what occurred so that investigation could be directed most effectively toward the most promising theories and locations. The 41 minutes pointed towards someone with specific knowledge about Nancy, her residence, her routines, and her vulnerabilities. Random crimes do not involve 41-minute operational windows. Random criminals do not spend nearly 3/4 of an hour at a crime scene. The duration alone argues against theories of opportunistic action or chance encounter. This was planned. This was targeted. This was executed by someone who had prepared and who knew that Nancy would be alone and that 41 minutes of operational time would be available without interruption. The medications left behind reinforced this conclusion about planning. Someone who spent 41 minutes in the residence would have seen prescription bottles. The decision to leave them behind was deliberate, and that deliberate choice revealed priorities that contradicted Ransom logic. If Ransom was genuine, medications would have been taken. Since they were not, Ransom was likely staging. Misdirection meant to make investigators believe this was about money when the actual motive remained hidden. And if investigators were correct about this assessment, then understanding the true motive required looking beyond Ransom, demands to other possible reasons Nancy would be targeted. The timeline would remain central to solving the case regardless of what additional evidence emerged. The 41 minutes represented the window when Nancy's fate was determined. Whatever happened, happened within that span. The pacemaker stopping at 2:28 a.m. marked the last moment when digital evidence documented anything definitive about Nancy's status. After that timestamp, the trail depended entirely on physical evidence, witness testimony, DNA results, and investigative analysis of motive and opportunity. 2:28 a.m. The moment when an 84-year-old woman's pacemaker went silent. 41 minutes after the first camera went offline. 16 minutes after footage captured a masked individual at the front door. That timestamp became more than just a number. It became a marker, a boundary between before and after, between documented fact and investigative theory. The last definitive data point in a timeline that told the story of planning, execution, and the 41 minutes that determined what happened to Nancy Guthrie.